Is it time to replace Quez Watkins as wide receiver 3? Is Jalen Hurts on the Eagles quarterback Mount Rushmore already? Will the Eagles draft offensive line early in 2023? All that and more on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Friday edition of the show, and it's sponsored by the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Eagles podcast and the NFL. It's FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, even throughout the offseason. We're only 1 week, less than a week removed from the Eagles' Super Bowl loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. I can't believe it hasn't even been a week. It's been a long 5 days, at least for me personally. I'm still struggling a lot with this. I'm trying to move forward. I'm trying to think about free agency and all the in-house decisions that Howie Roseman has to make and start to focus on the draft, right? We have the process coming up. The NFL Combine is soon. The Pro Day circuit's going to be here before you know it. We've got our offseason simulations coming up next week. Mock Draft Monday is going to be here. The Eagles have 2 first-round picks. There's a lot going on this offseason. Jalen Hurts is probably going to get that mega contract, so you have to move on pretty quick. I think Gino's doing better with it, though, than I am, at least emotionally. I keep rewatching highlights from the game. I keep thinking about some of these incredible performances the Eagles had on the offensive side of the ball, and while a loss doesn't negate those performances and doesn't remove those stories from the history books that is the history of the Philadelphia Eagles, it doesn't quite have that same magic without the season ending in confetti. I don't know, for me. And again, 2022 was still the greatest season of my lifetime as an Eagles fan. Even over 2017, even over the Super Bowl win, I feel like I had a lot more fun this year. Maybe it's personal too, because of I got to do this show. I was living in Philadelphia for a while. You know, there were so many awesome memories in the offseason with Gino. You know, when A.J. Brown was, traded to the Eagles live on our draft show, there was being in Alabama for the first time for the Senior Bowl and all these incredible blowout wins in the regular season and how talented this team was on both sides of the ball and the records they were setting. It was so much fun, but I think that's why it hurts a little more, because it just felt like the perfect season. And for it to end in the most heartbreaking loss that I've suffered as a 25-year-old Eagles fan is tough for sure. I can't help but continue to think about some of those performances. And of course, Jalen Hurts is the big one. And I want to get into that a little bit more later on in the show. But I was even rewatching the highlights again today and looking at that trio of weapons in the passing game. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. That trio was incredible on Sunday. I mean, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown combined for 173 yards and a touchdown. Some of the plays downfield that Smith was making, and Brown in the clutch right late in the game when the game was close in the first half. It felt like, those were the players that weren't a part of that first Super Bowl run. It wasn't Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. It was 3 players that had never been a part of a Super Bowl. Yeah, they've been in big games in college and the NFL, but you would have thought they were 10, 15-year veterans with their composure, and they were ready to play. That offense was alive and ready to go, and they gave it their all in a legendary performance where Jalen Hurts is over 370 yards from scrimmage and 4 total touchdowns. And man, I came away watching those highlights again thinking, what a special trio Smith, Brown, and Goddard are. It is the best trio of weapons the Eagles have had in NFL history. And the fact that, again, it didn't end in a ring. I don't know if everybody else is still struggling like I am, or maybe the ring in 2017 helped a little bit more. Maybe those early 2000s losses, those heartbreaks prepared you for this moment. That's kind of what Gino was saying, that it wasn't really anything new to him. But I don't know. For me, that was really tough just because of how special this season was. So I'm still struggling. And again, watching the highlights, looking at how good that trio was, it's kind of crazy, though, that at the end, the player that's number was called in one of the biggest moments was Quez Watkins, and he could not get it done. And that was really disappointing to me. Rewatching and thinking back to that moment and now the Eagles situation at wide receiver 3, you guys know I was a big Quez Watkins guy. I still really do like him as a player. I love his explosiveness. I believe that, you look at who he was in 2021, he showed a lot of promise as a complete receiver with contested catches, with his reliability with his hands. He had the highest catch rate of any Eagles receiver in 2021, even over Devontae Smith. You guys know I was on the Quez Watkins train. How many times for LOE3 this year did I say hammer the over on Quez Watkins receiving yards because they gave him such low odds? But man, the second half of the season towards the end, he was just not good. He was not finishing routes. He was dropping balls. He was just being kind of invisible and not making the explosive plays he did a year before. And he, part of it too was it was hard for him to get involved when you have Brown, Goddard, and Smith. But when his number, he didn't have his number called a lot this year. But how heartbreaking and how disappointing that Watkins finally does get his name called, his number called, in an area that he thrives, supposed to be thriving, deep down the field. Jalen Hurts put the ball on the money to set up what would have been a touchdown and retake the lead. And Quez Watkins jumps early, doesn't finish running through the route, and the ball still goes right through his hands, and he also drops it. And that's disappointing because, again, Quez Watkins, he didn't really get to do a lot this year, but he had a chance to be a hero. He had a chance to do what Corey Clement did in 2017 and, so Jermaine Kearse did for the Seattle Seahawks. So many role players in low-end, not big household names that have suddenly become legends in the Super Bowl and will be remembered forever. Quez Watkins had an opportunity to be that guy. If he catches that ball, we're always going to remember that play. And instead, we're going to remember it as a what could have been moment. And now it kind of confirmed a lot of people's doubts about him in the second half of the season. Now people are thinking, is it time to get a new wide receiver 3? Is it time to start looking at some free agents, maybe middle to late round draft picks? And I'm starting to think the same thing. Quez Watkins said it himself at his end of the year press conference when they were emptying out the lockers. He said it was a really down year for him compared to what he expects. And I agree. I think the 2021 version of Watkins was way better than 2022. I think they need to maybe not fully replace him because I think even the Eagles were surprised and disappointed because they thought he could be a legitimate player for this offense. Even before, free agency and the draft began, they were before they traded for A.J. Brown, they were saying, and maybe it was just lip service, but they were saying they believe Quez Watkins could be a wide receiver 2. And I thought I thought he's a better wide receiver 3, but I thought he could be a low end 2. I believed in Quez in that way as well. And man, that play in the Super Bowl is just, I'm sure it's going to haunt him for a long time. I think they do need to bring in competition more than Zach Pascal, who's a free agent. I look at some names and we'll talk about this more when we start our free agent previews, but you look at a Parris Campbell, who the Eagles liked in the 2019 draft. They were going to take him or J.J. Arcega-Whiteside with that second round pick. Parris Campbell had a good second half of the year with Indianapolis. He's a free agent. Mecole Hardman, another second-round pick from that 2019 class that I think the Eagles would have liked if Andy Reid didn't take him, 5 to 10 picks earlier out of Georgia in round 2. Mecole Hardman's a free agent. That's another explosive type of player like Campbell, like Quez Watkins that could fit that role as your fourth passing target. That's a good niche, deep down the field player, screen game, yards after the catch, maybe a good returner as well. Those are 2 options I think the Eagles could explore. There's also some former Eagles out there. Do you try to kick the tires on a reunion with Nelson Agholor or Mac Hollins just to force some competition? Are they much better than Quez, or are they even better than Quez? Probably not, but I'll tell you what, Nelson Agholor, he stepped up in the Super Bowl. He made those difficult catches that Quez had to come down with. So I think you're not looking for a wide receiver 3 because of that drop, but that drop just kind of was a representation of the down year and the disappointing season that Quez did have. And again, it wasn't all his fault. He wasn't involved a whole lot, didn't have his number called a lot, but he had his number called in some big moments in the second half of the year. And yeah, he had the big touchdown against the Colts and against the Packers, but you look at the fumble against Washington, you look at the drops and the interceptions against Dallas in a big spot, you look at the drop in the Super Bowl. There was another drop too in the playoffs. It was against the Giants or 49ers that he should have had. That was kind of the story of Quez Watkins. So, that trio was incredible in the Super Bowl, but I think the Eagles are going to be looking for a more reliable fourth target than maybe even Zach Pascal and Quez Watkins, which is disappointing. I don't think Quez is going to get cut and he's going to have a chance to compete, but he's not going to be the unquestioned starter. It's not a coincidence that Pascal started to really dip into his snaps and sometimes outplay him in the second half of the season and in the playoffs. I don't know the snap count specifically, but I would probably predict Pascal had more snaps in the playoffs than Quez. And Quez kind of played his way out of that role. So that's definitely disappointing. But, overall, it was just disappointing looking at those highlights because some other guys had some legendary performances that are not going to be forgotten, but they didn't result in wins. And that's always a little tougher to swallow, especially in the biggest game of the season. I want to get into Jalen Hurts a little bit more. I've still got some more thoughts about Hurts' incredible performance in Super Bowl 57. Coming up next, it's a Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. We are wrapping up another week of shows, the first week of shows for the 2023 offseason. And today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA and now the Locked On Podcast Network. We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, wrapping up this week of shows. This is the first week of podcasts for the 2023 offseason. I'm still struggling from that loss on Sunday. I can't believe it's only been 5 days. I'm trying to see the positives in it. Because there were some, again, when you have a 24-year-old quarterback he's the first player in NFL history to have 4 touchdowns in a Super Bowl and over 370 yards in a loss, right? He's the first quarterback ever with 2 rushing touchdowns and a passing touchdown in a Super Bowl. He outplayed Patrick Mahomes. A year ago, I watched Mahomes versus Josh Allen in that shootout and said, there's no way Hurts can ever be that guy that can keep up in this fight as a passer. And a year later, he did it in a Super Bowl. I mean, that's such an incredible story, and there's so many positives, but because of the positives almost make me hurt more because it didn't result in a win. But I still am in awe of that performance, not just from Jalen Hurts, but from Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you just got to tip your hat to Mahomes, man. I mean, you really do. How cool is it? And this is the positive, Lou, trying to look at the loss in this perspective. How cool is it, though, that the Eagles have been part of 2 of, if not the 2 biggest quarterback battles in Super Bowl history? It might be the 2 best ever battles. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what would be other ones, but Nick Foles and Tom Brady in 2018, Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes in 2023. What other Super Bowls did you see a 30-plus to 30-plus point shootout where 2 quarterbacks went nuclear? I'm trying to think. I can't really think of any off the top of my head that had the kind of back-to-back blow-for-blow type of, shootouts that Hurts and Mahomes had and Foles and Brady had. And that's really cool, is that the Eagles are going to go down in history as a team that had 2 quarterbacks battle 2 of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and they matched them blow for blow, and Nick Foles even beat Tom Brady, and Jalen Hurts outperformed Patrick Mahomes, who might be soon to be seen as he's starting to feel like the LeBron James to Tom Brady's Michael Jordan. And is he going to win 7 rings? No. Is LeBron going to win 6 rings? No, but he's got 4. Is Mahomes going to have 3 to 5? I would say probably. I think it's a safe bet. He still has 3 years until he's 30, and he's already got 2 rings, and he hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. So I think that's a really cool way to look at it. It's a cool perspective. And for a guy that loves the quarterback position, even in a loss, that was special to see your quarterback in front of the entire world, millions upon millions of people watching. And considering the storyline of everybody, including myself, doubted he could be that guy, for Jalen Hurts to make the Nick Foles throws, these mind-numbing, oh my God, wow plays over and over again in the clutch late in the game consistently for 4 quarters is just really cool. And it's crazy, though. You look at Patrick Mahomes has now survived in back-to-back years 2 of the greatest playoff performances from quarterbacks we've ever seen. If you look at Josh Allen in the divisional round last year, Bills Chiefs, the game that I literally mentioned, it feels like every other show for Locked On Eagles. And I apologize if people are getting sick of the same examples, but I think it's just like that was a measuring stick moment for me. It was that game. And that's what maybe it was too high of a standard for Jalen at the time. Maybe it wasn't fair, but he did it. He met that measuring stick. So it's a cool thing for me to keep going back to. But it is crazy that Patrick Mahomes survived maybe the 2 best playoff performances we've ever seen from quarterbacks, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And again, there's things in that game that make you very upset the Eagles didn't win. I'll never forgive Jonathan Gannon for that performance. The defense overall, the fact that they couldn't get 1 stop in the second half is just brutal. It's torturing considering what the offense pulled off. That if you would have told me the Eagles score 35 plus points against Kansas City, I say they win the football game. I say they definitely win the football game. But at the same time, you also kind of looking at Mahomes' performance, you do kind of have to just throw your hands up in the air and give him the old tip of the cap, right? It's kind of like when you face LeBron James, Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods in golf. It's harder to be mad when you see all-time greats go off like that and you know there's nothing you can do to stop them. It's hard to be super upset because you know they're generational, once-in-a-lifetime kind of players. So I think that's some of the solace that I'm finding is it's Patrick Mahomes. This is what he does. Jalen Hurts outperformed him. That's an incredible story. He's 24 years old. I think he's only going to get better. These are the positives that I'm really relying on right now because I'm still on life alert when it comes to thinking about that football game. So I think Jalen Hurts, honestly, I would go as far, and I tweeted it out today. People didn't love my Mount Rushmore list for Eagles quarterbacks, but I bumped Randall Cunningham off the list of Mount Rushmore for Eagles quarterbacks, and I put Jalen Hurts on it already. He had the best season in 2022 that any Eagles quarterback has ever had. I think he was better than Nick Foles in that Super Bowl, one of the best Super Bowl performances of all time. And I'm so confident that he's not going to become Carson Wentz, that he's going to be the quarterback for a decade, and they're going to consistently compete for championships, that I'm already confident that I'd put him on Mount Rushmore. I would take off Randall Cunningham, who's an all-time great, and I'd put Hurts on that Rushmore. I have Wentz on there. That's why people are pissed off, but you don't win a Super Bowl without him, so that's why I have him on there over Randall. So you can see that whole list at DiBiase LOE on Twitter. I'll just tell you now, though. Nick Foles, Jalen Hurts, Donovan McNabb, Carson Wentz. That's my 4-man Mount Rushmore of Eagles quarterbacks. But those are some of the positives I'm trying to find. As you can tell, this episode is more for me than you guys. Or maybe it is for you too if you're in my boat right now when it comes to my headspace. This is almost a therapy session where I'm just trying to talk my way through this loss and kind of just process my emotions and just try to understand what just happened. You know what I mean? Just like decompress and just, figure it out, because that game, it did a lot for sure. Positives and negatives. It was just a roller coaster ride. This entire season was. So we're all just trying to process what the hell just happened. But that's the beauty of the sport. That's the fun part is it's never, Gino says it all the time in this podcast. It's never a dull moment with the Philadelphia Eagles. And even in the Super Bowl, that is exactly the case. So I think Locked On of any podcast, me and Gino, we never struggle to find things to talk about. Even when I'm doing a solo show like I am today, giving Gino the day off on a Friday night, there's never a dull moment for sure. One more segment here on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles coming up next. I have some thoughts on the offensive line, thinking about the future of Jason Kelce, Isaac Seumalo, and Lane Johnson. We'll get into that and more coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Guys, today's episode is sponsored by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I've had competing against my fellow Locked On NFL hosts, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. He won it all. He's our Locked On NFL champion. Now it's your turn to compete, but more on that later. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season, all in this challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want to, when you want to. We've created a Locked On League. Create a league with your friends and family. Locked On Eagles listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On, LOCKEDON in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. You can find our show Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. I want to wrap up the show by thinking about the offensive line a little bit, thinking about the future now, moving forward to free agency, the decisions that Howie Roseman has to make, mostly focused on in-house decisions to keep this core and run it back next year, who to move on from, who's going to decide to move on from the Eagles, who's going to stay, who's going to get new deals, all that and more. You're thinking about the draft too. If you're going to replace some of these guys with your 2 first-round picks and all these selections you have on day 2 and day 3. When it comes to the offensive line, I thought about that because the right side of the line, for the first time in a long time, the future is kind of up in the air. I mean, the Eagles have had, I think, the most inconsistency, and they haven't had a lot of inconsistency and moving parts of the line, and that's a luxury in years. I mean, but I would say if there were any question marks normally for the Eagles offensive line, it's on the left side. Is Jason Peters still your left tackle? It was, what's the future of Andre Dillard, your former first round pick? Is Jordan Mailata going to become who he is now at left guard? It was, was it Isaac Seumalo? It was Isaac Seumalo, and then Steven Wisniewski, and then Landon Dickerson moves over to left guard. And you're saying after Seumalo got hurt, right, because Brandon Brooks was on the right side last year, and then he gets hurt. So you're saying, is Dickerson going to be Kelce's replacement long-term at center? Is he going to be the left guard of the future? So the left side is normally where the question marks have been, because you've always known you've had Kelce and Lane, and they're not going anywhere. And then at right guard, you had Brandon Brooks for a long time. And then Isaac Seumalo has filled in beautifully in that spot over the last year. And even when it wasn't him, Jack Driscoll was good. I mean, Suo Opeta. When you're sandwiched in between 2 first ballot Hall of Famers, I mean, you're going to be good. But now it's like, okay, Jason Kelce, he's either going to play for one more year in 2023 or he's going to retire. Isaac Seumalo is an unrestricted free agent, and I think he's going to cash in after this season he had in 2022. I don't know if the Eagles are going to be able to bring him back or if they're going to want to, considering how good their line is. Jeff Stoutland gets the most out of their guys. Are they going to overpay for a right guard? I'm not sure. Lane Johnson isn't his prime still, but he's mentioned only maybe playing for a few more years. So they have some question marks. And I know they need, this year, I think they need to draft a cornerback early in the draft with one of those first 3 picks they have in the first and second round. But my money is still probably on them going linemen, definitely with one of their first round picks and maybe 2 of them. Defensive line, offensive line, maybe 2 picks on either side. I still think 2 of those 3 picks are going to be linemen, because you have Cam Jurgens at center, right? And I don't think Lane Johnson will retire soon. So I think you're going to be okay even if Kelce does retire. But like I said, I think Seumalo is going to cash in. Kelce isn't playing longer than 1 more year. And Lane Johnson, we don't know the future of. So not only do the Eagles always want to have depth on the offensive line, they want to be sure they have top tier talent. So considering some of these question marks, again, you're not going to have 3 new starters next year, but within the next 2 years, you don't know what your future is in those 3 spots. I bet you they're going to spend a top pick at, I don't think center. Again, Jurgens, even if he would, let's say Seumalo leaves this year, right? And Jurgens goes to right guard, they're not going to do the Landon Dickerson thing again, where if Kelce retires, now they have Jurgens and Dickerson at the guard spots, and then they draft another center. I don't think so. Jurgens is going to be the center. And then I could see them drafting somebody like maybe Osiris Torrance from Florida at right guard. I could see them drafting a right tackle to potentially be the heir apparent to Lane Johnson. I could see them potentially doing both. So you got to remember too, it's not just because they might need new starters eventually, but look at the depth. You have Jack Driscoll, who's kind of a tweener, guard and tackle, but I didn't love him at right tackle last year. And Andre Dillard wasn't a right tackle, and he's a free agent anyway. He's going to be a starting left tackle next year somewhere. So not only do you need the potential heir apparents to Seumalo, Lane, And we'll see with Kelce eventually down the road with Juergens. Not only do you need eventual heir apparent at the starting spots, but you also need more backups. Like Jack Driscoll can't play every single spot. They are definitely going to need more depth. I'm telling you, again, I want them. I think they need to take a corner because James Bradberry is going to cash in. But I think this is going to be another draft where you see 2 of the 3 top picks. Maybe it's offensive line, corner. Maybe it's defensive line, corner. Maybe it's 3 linemen. But if I was a betting man, and I am a lot of the time with FanDuel, knowing their history and knowing the landscape right now, they're not in trouble on the offensive line by any stretch of the imagination. I think 4/5 of the line will be back next year. But for the future, the Eagles like to be ahead of things when it comes to the trenches. They do not want they don't want to win with their offensive line. They want to win because of their offensive line. So I guarantee you they are going to invest in those spots. I think Lane will be back. I think Kelce will be back. I don't think Seumalo will be back, but that's only for 2023. We have no guarantees after that. They need depth. Howie Roseman is definitely going to continue to invest up front to protect Jalen Hurts long-term. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. That'll do it for another week of shows. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe to Locked On Eagles on all podcast platforms, Monday through Friday, and on YouTube as well. And we're always talking birds on Twitter. Hit us up at Locked On Birds. I'm on Twitter at DiBiase, and my co-host Gino Camilleri, he's on Twitter at GC24_football. That's going to do it. Again, we'll see you on Monday for another week of shows, off-season simulation time. Gino and I are going to play the role of Howie Roseman, go through free agency, in-house decisions, unrestricted free agency, the draft process, all that and more. That's coming off season is here, everybody. As always, thank you for downloading Locked On Eagles. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.